The evening light stretched itself thin across the hills, golden and exhausted. It clung to the rocks, to the sparse tufts of grass, to the low, dry shrubs that had learned to live with less. The air was warm but tired, the kind of heat that forgets it's supposed to fade. At the crest of the hill, a goat stood still. He was old, ribs showing through his rough coat, horns worn smooth by time. His fur was gray where it used to be brown, and his eyes were the color of dust. He didn't chew, didn't move. He just watched the horizon where the sun refused to go down. Below him, the land dipped into a shallow valley where a farmhouse sat, small and crooked, its paint long peeled by weather and neglect. The windmill beside it creaked without turning, and the sound carried faintly up the hill. Eli Mercer, the man who still called that place home, leaned against the porch railing. His hands were cracked from work that no longer had much to show for itself. He squinted toward the goat, half blind from the light. "Still there, huh?" he said softly. The goat didn't answer. He never did. Eli had found him 2 summers ago, wandering the roadside, bones and fur, half starved but stubborn. He'd brought him up the hill to graze, figuring he'd wander off again once he found something better. But the animal never left. Always climbed back up to the same spot each evening, standing still until the light gave up. Eli called him Old Man. It felt right. The sun slid lower, but only a little. The light didn't soften, it thickened, hanging in the air like smoke. The shadows didn't grow longer, just darker. Eli rubbed a hand over his face. "You'd think the day would be done by now." Inside the house, the clock ticked too slow. The sound was faint, muffled by walls that held more dust than air. A fly circled the window, its buzzing lazy and uneven. The air smelled of dry wood and old metal. He poured himself a glass of water from the tin pitcher, took a sip, and stared at the horizon again. The goat hadn't moved. There was a stillness in the world that wasn't peace, more like waiting, the kind of waiting that came before storms that never arrived. Eli set the glass down, went back outside, and started up the hill, his boots scuffed against the dirt, the stones shifting under his weight. The higher he climbed, the warmer it got. Not from the air, but from the light itself, like the sun had decided to stay, just to see what would happen if it didn't. When he reached the top, the goat turned its head slightly, acknowledging him without really caring. Eli stood beside him, breath heavy, eyes fixed on the horizon. The sun sat just above the far ridge, caught in its own descent. It should have been gone by now, but it lingered, pale orange, stretched wide, almost trembling. "You ever seen it do that before?" Eli asked. The goat flicked his ear, but didn't move. Didn't think so. He looked down toward the valley. The farmhouse looked small now, like a memory he hadn't meant to keep. The fence posts cast long shadows that didn't point anywhere. Eli exhaled. "You waiting for something too?" The wind rose faintly, carrying dust across the ridge. The goat's fur rippled once, then settled. For a long time, neither of them moved. The sun stayed pinned to the horizon, refusing to fade. The light turned thick and colorless, the air humming faintly with heat. When Eli finally looked away, the goat was watching him. Not curious, not afraid, just watching, as if waiting for him to admit something. Eli smiled, tired and small. "All right," he said. "You win. We'll wait it out together." The world around them didn't darken. It only deepened. The colors heavy, the silence heavier. And as the last thin edge of the sun refused to sink, both man and goat stood still, two old shapes holding their ground against a day that wouldn't let go. By the second evening, the light still hadn't changed. It wasn't night, not really. The sky stayed fixed in that same endless dusk, orange fading into pale gray, like a photograph that had forgotten how to age. The air was warm, the ground dry, the shadows stretched but never swallowed. Eli Mercer woke early and went to bed late, though both felt the same. His clock had stopped sometime during the night, its hands frozen at 7:42. The stillness inside the house made it sound louder than it should, a single broken tick echoing every few seconds, like a breath that didn't know when to stop. He stood by the window, looking up toward the hill. The goat was still there. Same spot, same stance. His body sharp against the dim sky, horns curved and black. The light caught on his coat, turning it into something between silver and rust. Eli muttered, "You really don't move much, do you?" He pulled on his boots and stepped outside. The air felt heavier than before, though it wasn't hotter, just thicker, like the world had decided to slow down. The valley stretched wide and silent. No birds, no wind through the grass. Even the insects had gone quiet. The only sound was the soft crunch of his steps as he made his way up the slope. Halfway up, he stopped to catch his breath. The sky above shimmered faintly, the color of copper dust. For a moment, he thought he saw something move along the horizon, a shape far away, long and dark. But when he blinked, it was gone. He shook his head. Heat's playing tricks again. When he reached the top, the goat turned its head slightly, just enough to let Eli know he'd been seen. "You been up here all day?" Eli asked. The goat didn't move. Eli crouched beside him, resting his arms on his knees. The soil smelled strange, not dry anymore, but faintly metallic. He dug his fingers into it, and it came up darker than before. "What are you standing guard over, huh?" The goat chewed nothing, blinked once, then turned back toward the horizon. Eli followed his gaze. The sun still hung there, hovering halfway down the sky. It looked worn now, its edges blurred and uneven, as if it had grown tired but couldn't remember how to sleep. He said quietly, "You ever get the feeling time just gave up?" From the direction of the farmhouse came a faint clang, the sound of something metallic shifting in the wind. But there was no wind. Eli frowned. What the hell?" He turned back toward the house, but the air shimmered again. That same wavering haze that made the distance look liquid. The noise stopped. When he looked back at the goat, the animal was staring at him. Not past him, not through him, but directly. Eli exhaled slowly. "All right, you got my attention." He sat down beside him, cross-legged in the dust. The ground was warm, almost pulsing beneath his palms, as if it remembered sunlight that refused to leave. The goat's tail flicked once. The air buzzed faintly, low and constant, like the hum of wires somewhere deep underground. Eli said, "You're not just waiting, are you? You're watching." The goat blinked again, slow, deliberate. Watching what, though? The sun trembled slightly at the horizon, not sinking, not rising, just flickering. The light grew dimmer, then brighter again, pulsing like a heartbeat. Eli's throat went dry. He looked down at the ground, at the faint cracks in the soil, spreading outward like veins. The hum grew louder for a moment, then faded again. He stood slowly. Whatever this is," he said, "it's not just a long day." The goat's ears twitched, and for the first time, he made a sound, a low, short bleat that didn't echo. It was too soft to be natural, too timed, like an answer. Eli stepped back, eyes fixed on him. "Say that again." But the animal had gone still. The light pressed against them both, heavy and endless. Down below, the farmhouse looked smaller, its shadow stretched thin and fading into nothing. The valley looked strange now, colors too sharp, the ground too flat, as though the world had stopped holding its breath and started holding something else instead. Eli rubbed a hand over his face. "Fine," he said. "We'll wait another night." He turned toward the house, but before he took a step, the goat bleated once more, louder this time, deep and rough. The sound rolled down the hill and vanished into the valley, leaving the silence behind heavier than before. Eli glanced over his shoulder. The goat hadn't moved, but the ground at his hooves shimmered faintly, just a small patch, glowing with the last stubborn color of the dying sun. He whispered, "You're standing on something, aren't you?" The goat didn't look at him. Eli stared at the light until it faded, until the hill looked normal again. Then he turned away and started down the slope, the air buzzing faintly around his ears. By the time he reached the porch, the clock inside the house had started ticking again. He looked up at the hill. The goat was still there. The sun still hadn't gone. And for the first time, Eli wasn't sure which one of them was keeping the other from leaving. By the third day, the light had lost its meaning. It was no longer morning or evening, just one endless hour stretched too thin, the sun hovering over the hills, like something caught between memory and hesitation. The sky had faded to the color of dust, and even the shadows looked confused. Eli Mercer hadn't slept again. He'd tried, sitting in the old chair by the window, eyes half closed, the silence pressing against his chest. But every time he blinked, he saw that same shape on the hill, The goat. Still there. Still watching. When he finally stepped outside, the air met him like warm glass. No sound, no wind. The world smelled faintly of metal, the kind of scent that comes before rain that never falls. The goat hadn't moved. Eli climbed the hill slower this time. His legs ached, his breath shallow. The climb felt steeper than it had before. Though he'd walked it 100 times, the ground seemed to shift beneath his boots. Not soft, not firm, something in between, as though it wasn't sure what it was supposed to be. When he reached the top, the goat turned its head again, that same slow acknowledgement. The light hit its eyes in a strange way. No reflection, just depth, like two small wells filled with dusk. "You still keeping watch, old boy?" Eli asked, voice low and hoarse. The goat didn't answer. Eli crouched beside him, resting a hand on his knee. The soil beneath was warm, pulsing faintly. He placed his palm against it and froze. There was a rhythm there, steady, soft, alive. He pulled his hand back, eyes narrowing. What in God's name? The goat bleated once, short and low, almost like warning. Eli looked at him. "You feel it too, don't you?" The wind returned, not the kind that cools or moves things, but one that hums. It brushed past him like a breath drawn through hollow metal. The grass bent, slow and deliberate, pointing toward the sun still trapped above the ridge. Eli looked up. "You won't go down, will you?" he muttered. "You're waiting for something." He shielded his eyes and watched the disk shimmer, its edges bending like heat mirage. The light was wrong, too heavy, too thick. It looked close enough to touch. The goat stamped its hoof once hard. Eli glanced down. The ground had cracked, a thin straight line running between the goat's feet. He crouched again, tracing it with a fingertip. It pulsed faintly, that same rhythm he'd felt before. "Heartbeat," he whispered. The word felt strange, leaving his mouth, like he'd said something not meant for speaking. The goat shifted slightly, lowering its head toward the line. Eli watched as the light around it dimmed, just for a second, like the world had blinked. And then came the sound. A low groan, deep in the earth, like rock grinding against rock. It traveled through the ground, through Eli's boots, into his bones. The sun flared once, brighter, then steadied again. Eli stood quickly, heart pounding. What's happening? The goat didn't move. It just watched him, unblinking. The groan faded. The light held. Everything stilled again, except for one thing. In the valley below, the shadow of the house had shifted. It no longer pointed toward the east like it should have. It stretched toward the hill instead, long and thin, like a finger reaching up the slope. Eli stared, unable to look away. That's not right. The goat bleated again, louder this time, sharp and rough, the sound cutting through the air like a crack of wood. The shadow trembled, then stopped. Eli whispered, "You're warning me, aren't you?" The light pressed harder now, thick and amber. It clung to the goat's fur, turning it white at the edges. "I don't understand," Eli said. "Why won't it end? What are we waiting for?" The goat blinked slowly, turned its head back toward the horizon. Eli followed his gaze. Far away beyond the ridge, something flickered, a brief flash, like lightning behind a curtain. No thunder followed. And then, for the first time in 3 days, the sun moved. Not down, sideways. It slid across the horizon, dragging its light with it like a wound being stretched open. The color drained from the sky, leaving streaks of dull red and gray. The air shimmered, the hum deepened. Eli stumbled backward, staring. No, no, no. The goat stood firm, legs braced, head high. The sun stopped again, just hanging there, halfway across the sky, bleeding orange light into the dust. Eli swallowed hard. "You're standing where it ends, aren't you?" The goat lowered its head just slightly as if agreeing. The wind died again. The light dimmed. The hum fell silent. Eli looked down once more. The crack between them had widened. Inside it, the soil glowed faintly. A soft, golden pulse that matched his heartbeat. He whispered, "What are you holding back?" The goat didn't move. The sky turned the color of rust. The light trembled again. And somewhere deep below the hill, the earth exhaled. Slow, long, and full of something too old to name. Eli stood there until his shadow disappeared. The goat stayed beside him, unmoving, patient as the sun struggled against its own weight. And when the light finally steadied again, the world felt different, quieter, heavier, like it had heard a truth it wasn't supposed to know. By the fourth day, the hill had grown silent in a way that silence shouldn't be. The sound of the world was gone. Not just wind or birds or the hum of far-off engines, but the subtle things too. The tremor of air in the ears, the weight of distance, the space between thoughts. Everything hung still. The light had stopped changing altogether. It wasn't sunset anymore. Just an endless golden hour stretched thin and weary, the sun sagging low but never touching the ridge. Eli Mercer hadn't gone inside since the day before. He sat at the top of the hill beside the goat, a canteen untouched at his side, eyes half closed against the aching brightness. His shadow no longer moved. His watch had stopped. The world had forgotten how to measure itself. He turned the canteen in his hands, the metal warm to the touch. "You think it's just us?" he asked quietly. The goat didn't answer. He stood the way he always did, still patient, his eyes fixed on the horizon that refused to dim. Eli smiled faintly. "Yeah," he said. "Didn't think so." He glanced down the slope. The house looked smaller now, not just in distance, but in presence. Its walls seemed to lean inward, colors fading into the dry earth. The barn's roof gleamed too bright, as though the sun had sunk its claws into it and wouldn't let go. When he looked back at the ground, he saw the crack again, wider now, running between the goat's hooves, stretching toward the ridge like a vein of light. The soil along its edges glowed faintly, alive in a way it shouldn't be. Eli crouched beside it, running a trembling hand over the edge. "Still warm," he whispered, "still breathing." The pulse underneath was stronger now, a deep rhythmic thrum, steady as a heart that didn't belong to either of them. He stood, wiping his hand on his jeans. "Whatever's under here, it's waking up, isn't it?" The goat turned its head, slow, deliberate. His gaze met Eli's for the first time. Not curious, not wild, just knowing. Eli felt his throat tighten. "I don't know what you are," he said, "but you've been waiting for this, haven't you?" The animal blinked once. The air changed. The light dimmed, not fading, but thickening, as if the sun were drawing closer instead of leaving. The sky deepened to amber, then to rust, the color of old coins. The ground trembled softly beneath them, a slow, measured shake, the kind that feels less like motion and more like breath. Eli stumbled a step back, looking around. "All right," he said, voice breaking. "You got my attention." The goat bleated once, long, low, drawn out. The sound rolled down the hill, bouncing off the walls of the house below. It wasn't fear or warning. It was command. Then the sun moved. It didn't fall, didn't rise. It sank sideways, dragging the light with it. Shadows slid across the land in impossible directions, long and wrong. The color of the sky cracked, thin white fissures spreading through the gold like veins of light under glass. Eli covered his eyes, but the brightness came through his skin. The ground shook harder now, the pulse beneath becoming a roar. Dust lifted around them in circles. The goat didn't move. He stood firm, head raised, eyes fixed on the horizon as if staring down the sun itself. And for a moment, just one, Eli saw it. A figure in the light. Not a shape, not a man, but a presence. The sun's core flickered, dark at its center, as if something inside it had turned to look back. He whispered, "You're not waiting for the sun to go down. You're waiting for it to see you." The light pulsed once, bright enough to burn the edges of the world white. Then, silence again. When Eli opened his eyes, the hill was quiet. The light had softened, thinner now, as if exhausted. The crack in the ground glowed faintly, fading by the second. The goat still stood there, calm, unmoved. Eli stepped forward, voice low. "It saw you, didn't it?" The goat blinked slowly, then turned his head toward the valley. Down below, the shadow of the house was gone. Only the roof remained, gleaming faintly under the dying gold. Eli swallowed hard. "All right," he said. "I guess that's the price." The goat took a step forward, stopping at the edge of the crack. He bent his head and pressed his muzzle to the glowing soil. The light flickered once, then vanished. Darkness, real darkness, began to creep across the sky, the first true shadow in days. Eli exhaled, a sound that was half relief and half grief. Finally, he said, "You let it leave." The goat looked at him one last time, the kind of look that wasn't meant for understanding, only acknowledgement. Then he turned and walked down the far side of the hill, disappearing into the dim. Eli stayed where he was until the stars began to appear, slow and uncertain, like they'd forgotten where they belonged. When the last of the light slipped behind the ridge, he whispered to no one, "The sun didn't leave. It just stopped needing to." And the hill, quiet, cooling, alive with memory, held the echo of his words long after the dark had finally learned how to stay.